Hello and welcome to Portal Stormer. I'm Kelly Proudfoot and here I'm presenting information about LGBTQ plus deities. While I would consider myself straight or binary, especially in consideration with the LGBTQ plus community, I have been a supporter for decades and was brought up around gay people, along with having roommates, friends and colleagues in the community. I've often felt at odds when researching and creating content about the craft in terms of elements and deities such as gods and goddesses, male and female principles and so on, with the thought in the back of my head that there seemed to be no wiggle room for those who don't consider themselves heterosexual. I imagine that being gender fluid and non-binary must be a headache for the practitioner who wants to align themselves with deities, mythology, folklore and magic, when the majority of these elements are based on binary considerations. I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm no expert on LGBTQ plus living, but I have been exposed to many stories, emotions, thoughts, books, movies, art and people who have generously shared their knowledge. In this video, I'm exploring deities and characters known and obscure who might border on LGBTQ plus energies and principles, as well as those who are overtly related. So why the craft? For many people, paganism, to use a general term, is a safe haven for those who either feel ostracised by organised religion or who want to explore their spirituality without the confines of dogma and strict adherence to a faith that has obvious ties to psychological imperatives that are closer to personal beliefs and biases rather than altruistic and spiritual guidelines. Paganism offers a more natural approach to the exploration of spirituality and the expression of sexuality. Connectedness and the feeling of belonging seems to be more open in the craft, and since the 1960s, with feminism paving the way, people have flocked to paganism, which provides a sense of empowerment and an escape from oppression. The craft includes the good, the bad and the ugly, meaning that all levels of life can be freely explored and expressed without fear of recrimination. That said, there are those who like to dictate how you should practice witchcraft, but for the most part, especially as a solitary practitioner, it's easier to venture into unknown territory and safely create a path that suits your way of life. Deities have always mirrored our own psychology, sometimes providing an ideal that we can strive to achieve, but they can also possess energies that can be destructive. Researching mythology and history will reveal a rich variety of behaviours and stories that range from whimsical to terrifying, which allows us to accept our own foibles and gives us a deeper understanding of what it means to be a complex human being. Gender fluidity and different ways of expressing sexuality and spirituality is aligned with elements such as shamanism, shape-shifting and going beyond the veil. Pathworking is also a great tool for those who like to pave their own individual road to spirituality and self-discovery. Transgender considerations. Pagan communities are usually accepting of all members regardless of their orientation, due to the expression of love being sacred no matter what. Spirit is what counts, so it makes sense that physical considerations are secondary, if considered at all. Of course, being transgender has its own possibilities, such as the idea of existing as a two-spirit when it comes to Native American systems. Some transgender people might only identify with the sex they feel is right for them, so their practice might only be aligned with that gender in terms of the deities they choose to worship, but that doesn't mean that they would totally turn their back on other deities. Fluidity is often a part of everyday life for all of us who are open and accepting, so there's no reason to believe everything is cut and dried for cisgender practitioners, transgender or otherwise. Not all communities are open to everyone, and there are gay pagan groups who are strictly for those in the LGBTQ plus sphere. Some are only accepting of certain groups and do not accept transgender practitioners or cisgender pagans. And I know that there's a little issue with saying cisgender. I'm a woman, I'm a female, I'm happy with that, but I really don't care about terms, so that's why I'm saying cisgender here, just so you know. So it's important to do some research if you want to connect with a coven or group. One of the reasons I like being a hedge witch is that I get to choose what works for me and what doesn't, without the need for acceptance from others, which could be a consideration if you or your sexual orientation is a factor. In a way, there is a trans element in witchcraft, such as the idea of shape-shifting, invocation, totem magic, working with masks, and so on. So at the end of the day, whatever works should be the determining factor. Ancient cultures. LGBT... I'm going to say it again. I hate saying it. It's just... Anyway, let's just say people in the gay sphere. Let me just say that. But they were sometimes considered to be closer to the divine element of spirituality in ancient paganism, and they were revered for their ability to traverse other worlds. From Greece, Rome, India and China to South America and beyond, there were a wide variety of deities who delved into myriad sexual escapades, especially in the Hindu pantheon, where gender changing was a frequent occurrence. Mythology is rich with stories from pansexuality to gender fluidity, detailing elements contained in the collective unconscious that are sometimes repressed according to the rule of the day. Mystical and sacred experiences were often depicted with homosexual, transgender, or androgynous characters to denote mythic or spiritual interventions, possessions, or reincarnation. Having aspects of cisgender identities at the same time, or characters who can switch genders, are common themes in ancient mythology. And there are many stories about deities possessing humans and even animals, such as the story of Leda and the swan to have sex with mortals. Many creation myths tell stories about androgynous or hermaphrodite entities being involved in creating the world. In the Christian Bible, Genesis 1:26, God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Some Christians believe this was in reference to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, although others believe that it refers to Elohim, being both male and female. Some say that the androgynous aspects of deities who possess both female and male energies represent how, when combined, they are elevated to the level of a higher spirit. For those of us who border on agnosticism and atheism, it makes more sense to say that humans created deities and not the other way around, which rings true when we look at the humanistic behaviour exhibited by almost all of the gods and goddesses. Ranging from jealousy and anger to love and compassion, emotions and therefore the actions following them are specifically human when you read these stories. LGBTQ+ deities and historical characters according to region. African mythology. Nana Baruku was the great mother who created the universe in Dahumean mythology, containing both male and female energies, which were passed on to her children, Lisa, who was the moon, and Mawa, who was the sun. Combined, they were called Maulisa, representing transgender and androgynous essences. In Ghana, the Akan people have similar deities, such as Awu for the moon, Aku for Mercury, and Abreo for Jupiter. In Zimbabwe, the Shona people worship Mwari, who was a creator god that sometimes exhibits male and female aspects. Derived from Catholic and Yoruba beliefs, the religions of Candomblé and Santeria are mostly practiced in South American countries such as Brazil and Cuba, where some of the spirits, called the Orishas, have similar androgynous and homosexual attributes. Inle and Abata were brothers banished by their mother Yamaha, a sea goddess, to live at the bottom of the ocean after she was tricked into having intercourse with her other son, Shango. Inle's tongue was cut out and Abata was made deaf. They became lovers and communicated empathically, which explained the origins of incest and homosexuality, along with deafness and muteness. As a side note, this seems to have negative connotations in terms of the brothers being punished. However, their story can be interpreted in different ways. In voodoo, along with other spiritual traditions with roots in African mythology, being possessed by spirits is a common motif. No matter the gender of the practitioner, they are considered brides of the entity while under possession, with sexual and sometimes violent undertones. These spirits, known as Iwa, or Iwa, can be singular entities or groups representing different aspects of life. Transgender and homosexual attributes have been ascribed to several spirits, such as the Barons and Deities, linked with death, magic and ancestor worship. Gidi Nebo takes care of spirits of those who died young, and he sometimes appears as effeminate or like a drag queen even, when he possesses practitioners, leading them to exhibit all kinds of sexual activity. Baron Samedi and Mamam Brigitte are Gidi Nebo's parents. Baron Samedi is sometimes represented as transgender or bisexual, wearing women's clothing and a top hat. He has a predilection for sensual behaviour and a lust for anal sex. The Barons Lundi and Lima are lovers who teach practitioners homoerotic nude wrestling to increase the strength of the magic. And Baron Uwa, I think I'm saying that wrong, is considered to be the spirit, more often associated with homosexuality. Azuli is an Iwa associated with love, beauty and sensuality, often manifesting attributes related to LGBTQ plus traits. Azuli Frida is a protector of gay men, while Azuli Dantor watches over lesbians. Haitian Vodou and Louisiana Voodoo have spirits called Loa, and two notable lesbian entities are La Baleine and La Sirene, who are lovers, represented by a mermaid and a whale. Now we're going to move on to Egyptian mythology. Some historians state that depictions of homosexuality and androgynous or transgender behaviours were repressed in the later period due to negative connotations and views on so-called deviant sexuality in the area. There are, however, many stories in Egyptian mythology that detail LGBTQ plus events, deities and beliefs. Set, or Seth, was a storm god who also presided over the desert and was associated with natural disasters and was said to be impotent. He was considered an evil entity, not necessarily because of his foray into homosexuality, but rather his impotence, which was akin to death in opposition to his siblings Osiris and Isis, who represented life due to having children. Horus was the sky god of power and healing, and the son of Isis and Osiris. Horus and his uncle Set had a power struggle that involved Set trying to prove his supremacy by admiring Horus's backside and even attempting anal intercourse, which resulted in Set ejaculating on Horus's thighs. Horus threw the semen in the river, when Set mistakenly claimed triumph. Horus then ejaculated on some lettuce, which was Set's favourite food, and after Set ate the lettuce, they went to visit the gods to see who had dominance over Egypt. When the gods called forth Set's semen, and it answered from the river, his claim was voided. Calling Horus's semen resulted in the answer coming from inside Set, which proved that Set was evil and resulted in the belief that homosexuality was also evil, even though there's a different story where the sexual act between the two was consensual. In this story, Horus's semen in Set created Thoth's lunar disk, which denotes a positive result. Human and crop fertility were often intertwined in Egyptian civilization in accordance with the flooding of the river Nile. The god of the Nile was Hapi or Happy, and the god of the Nile Delta was Wajwer, and while both were male, they were often depicted with pendulous breasts and female attributes. Hapi, a son of Horus, was represented in hieroglyphics as transgender, wearing a false ceremonial beard. He was a fertility deity and ruled over both male and female reproduction, according to some historical scholars. Wajwer was also a fertility god who was known as the pregnant god. Wajwer, which means the great green, had sovereignty over rivers and lagoons. He presided over prosperity and procreation and was depicted with a pregnant belly along with breasts. Several goddesses and female pharaohs were shown with male genitals and attributes. Hatshepsut is considered by some scholars to be the first transgender figure in recorded history. She was always depicted wearing men's clothing, unlike other female rulers, and was also shown with a male body. Her history was almost wiped out by her descendant, Thutmose III. In ancient Egypt, it seems that lesbianism was tolerated more than male homosexuality, go figure, possibly due to the fact that women were still fertile, regardless of their sexual proclivities. Isis, the moon goddess of life, magic, protection, healing, and many other attributes, was often worshipped by gay priests in ancient Egypt. She appeared in the dream of a pregnant woman, Telethusa, who was worried about having a girl and disappointing her husband. Isis told Telethusa to have the child, Iphis, and raise her as a boy. Iphis later begged Isis to make her male, after having fallen in love with a woman called Lianthe. Her wish was apparently granted. Some scholars believe that Isis and her sister Nephthys, who was the goddess of death and protection, were lovers, although they were often seen together and noted for their epic mourning of the death of their brother Osiris. Nephthys was believed to be a lesbian but was married to Set and had no children with him, probably because he was impotent. She did have a son with Osiris, and some say that she was the mother of Anubis. The first deity in Egyptian creation mythology was Atum, who was both male and female. Atum was self-created from nothing and then went on to create through a sneeze or semen, Shu, which was air, and Tefnut, which is moisture, who began Geb, earth, and Nut, or Nut, the sky. After a few generations, Isis and Osiris were born, representing the female and male archetypes. Shay was god of fate in ancient Egypt and sometimes appeared in female form, known as Shait, representing birth in the material world, as well as rebirth in the afterlife. Shay, or Shait, was associated with Renenutit, sorry about my pronunciations, who was the goddess of fortune. And just before I go on to Mesopotamian mythology, I just wanted to let you know that just check for the link in the description so you can see my blog post on my website. So if you wanted to see about all the names I stuff up in this video, at least you'll be able to read it. Anyway, so let's go on to Mesopotamian mythology. The goddess Ninmah, also known as Ninhursag, in the Sumerian creation myth, was the fertility goddess of the mountains. Her offspring include a woman who cannot give birth and a being who has no reproductive organs, signifying androgyny or a third gender. The supreme god Enki assigned roles to them, such as priestesses and servants. Third-gender priests and priestesses, called Gala, sung laments in worship to the goddess Inanna, who was the queen of heaven and had powers of love, sex, beauty, and war, among other attributes. In the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu was the intimate companion of Gilgamesh, and some scholars believe that the relationship was sexual. It was considered a sign of good fortune in ancient Assyrian society if a man had sex with another male of equal status or even a cult prostitute. Religious texts of the era contained prayers and blessings for homosexual relationships, and art depicting anal sex in religious rituals reflected an open attitude towards same-sex lifestyles. Enheduanna was a high priestess of Inanna and a poet in an ancient Sumerian city, who wrote the poem Passionate Inanna, with a notable line, "To turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man are yours, Inanna." Inanna herself was considered by some to be androgynous and even sporting a beard, although this could represent her appeal to transgender disciples and temple eunuchs of that era. Now we're going to move into Aztec and Mayan mythology. Homosexuality was approved in Mayan culture prior to the Spanish invasion and Christian taboos re sexuality, thanks to the god known as Chin, who was a maize god from the classical period. Some scholars state that Chen, the moon goddess of magic and maize, was also known as Chin, and she was associated with homosexual relationships when Mayan nobles wanted to encourage their children into same-sex marriages. Notable families procured young men to be lovers for their sons, who then lived together in a marriage-like relationship. Chin was depicted as effeminate, and he represented a third gender, also associated with dance and art. In Aztec mythology, the god of maize, beauty, dance, art, games, song, and flowers was Xochipilli, who was known as the Flower Prince. He was the patron of homosexuals as well as homosexual prostitutes, while also personifying same-sex eroticism and the appreciation of entertainment, exotic foods, and perfumes. The Huastecs were lesbian or transgender priestesses in the Aztec period, watched over by the goddesses, let me try to get this right, Xochiquetzal and Tzlatzodetl. Let's see if that works out. The latter was also known as the Filth Eater, who turned suffering into gold, representing her powers of protection for the oppressed. Now we're going to move on to Native American and Inuit mythology. The two-spirit concept is a theme in some Native American tribes, representing both male and female principles. Akulujijuzu and Umanituk were first two humans, male, in Inuit mythology and were drawn together by a desire to mate, resulting in Umanituk becoming pregnant. I'm sorry in advance, again, well, after the fact. A spell was cast to change his sex so that he could give birth. Once female, Umanituk became responsible for guarding against overpopulation by using magic to create war. Sedna was a creator goddess in Inuit mythology who presided over marine animals and was sometimes depicted as a hermaphrodite assisted by two spirit shamans. Also known as White Whale Woman, she apparently married a woman according to some stories which portray her as a lesbian or bisexual. In Lakota mythology, Anog-Iti, or the double-faced woman, sometimes appears in women's dreams in a variety of disguises, indicating that the dreamers are destined to become lesbians or two spirits. Now we're moving on to Hawaiian and Polynesian mythology. In Hawaiian mythology, Wahiniomo, Thrush Woman, was a goddess shown to have relationships with the goddesses Hopo and Hayaka. Hopo was killed by the volcano goddess Pele, who used lava to consume her to get back at her sister, Hayaka. I know I'm probably saying that wrong. Who supposedly had relations with Pele's husband. Hayaka, who also had relationships with Paiopole, who was a fern goddess, as well as a devotee of Pele called Omeo. Prince Lohiau was bisexual, having relationships with Pele and Paoa, who was male. Pu'ueli was another sister of Pele and was a hill goddess, who was a lover of the goddess Pu'amayai. In Polynesian mythology, the term Aikani denotes sexual love and passionate friendship, which was often used to describe the relationships between many of their deities. Haiakaialauni was a goddess who was the lover and servant of Papa, the earth creator goddess, as well as Wakia, Papa's husband. Kamapua'a was a pig god who sent Lono Kiawa Wialaha. You're going to be laughing at me, I'm so sorry, I'm stuffing this up. Who was the love god, to seduce Haiakalalo and Haiakaluna, Pele's brothers, to thwart attack. The bisexual god of mirages and the sea was Limaloa, who had relations with Kamapua'a.